Hey everybody, happy Torch Thursday! That's right, it's time to play with fire on the Beading Dreams stream. Everybody's, at least my favorite stream of the week. I've already been told I'm not allowed to burn the place down though, so that takes a little bit of fun out of it, as far as I'm concerned. You know, that I have to actually be careful and stuff. But anyway, welcome to the Torch Thursday tutorial. This is our twisted bar earrings. This is one of my favorite techniques to do because it is so dang simple and easy, and you can do so many things with it. I was so excited the first time I did this tutorial that I made like 2 or 3 subsequent tutorials using exactly the same technique because I just had so much fun doing it. So let's talk tools and supplies for this evening's. Thanks, Beverly. These are, you know, I actually made these in a lesson with a client. They're inspired by some earrings from, okay, it's a little dark, but when I put my really white soldering board on the stream, it's gonna kind of explode. So I'm sorry the earrings are a little dark right now, but yeah, they were inspired by some earrings out of Sundance, and I just love them because they go with everything. Because they've got like all kinds of colors on them, and it's really awesome.
They're amazing.
So they're when I have no clue. Here, I feel like that's not doing them justice. Yeah, that's a little bit better. So yeah, when I feel like I have no idea what earrings I want to wear, these are the ones that wind up on my ears, and absolutely love them. Also, these are a great stash buster because I do have my beads paired up, meaning I do have the same beads on, you know, on each earring. So each earring does have the same beads in the same order, but I think you could even get away with not doing that.
Yeah, when you put that much on there.
Yeah, when you put that much on there, it's hard, you know, as long as the colorway kind of is copacetic. It's, you know, it's really hard to sort of distinguish each individual bit. So great stash buster project for sure. Okay, so this evening's tutorial, what do we need? We are going to need some wire. I'm using 18 gauge bronze. You could use, see, it says right there, bronze 18 gauge. So you can use, since we're fabricating, you need to use metals that are friendly for fabrication friendly metals. So that's going to be sterling silver, solid 14 karat gold, brass bronze, copper. You can fabricate with gold filled, but the problem with gold filled is when you put a torch to it, a lot of times you'll scorch away the gold layer, and so what happens is over time, that part of your earring where you, ooh, yay! Heather's the bomb. She's a beast.
Rawr.
So yeah, so you'll scorch away the gold, and then what happens is over time, the places where the gold layer has thinned or disappeared completely start to oxidize, and so what you wind up is you've got these shiny gold earrings, and then you start getting brown spots on them. So as far as soldering with gold filled, like, it's totally doable thing. You just have to be aware that that's a potential consequence of soldering with gold filled. Personally, I love my bronze, so that's what I'm using tonight. You're also going to need a couple of other supplies. You're going to need a pair of beads, and I've got some pretty labradorite beads here. You're going to need 2 head pins. Yay, Lori! That's awesome. Yes, and I saw the picture that Turbo was helping Lori sort her newly acquired beads, which was freaking adorable.
Good Turbo.
Yes. He was so cute. It was this little black kitty head poking up from a forest of like bead bags. It was great. So 2 beads, 2 head pins, 2 ear wires. That's all, of course, assuming you have 2 ears. You're going to need some easy solder, and this is actually 14 karat gold solder, which is what I typically use when I'm soldering bronze. There's really not a solder that's specifically bronze colored, but I tend to like the yellow color of 14 karat gold solder against bronze better than silver. And as I can show you on my earrings, it is actually possible for your solder joint to be, you know, pretty much invisible. Oh, for goodness sakes, you know. Anyway, you can barely, I swear, it looks like it's the middle of the night on my stream. I'm gonna kick up the exposure, and I guarantee you I'm gonna regret this as soon as I put down my solder board.
Is it maybe the middle of the night?
Well, but it's not the middle of the night, you see. It just looks like the middle of the night. I mean, the sun was shining on the sea, shining with all its might.
Well, dang it.
But anyway, so you can see a little bit better now that I made it lighter. Okay, this one I used too much solder. So that right there is a big old blobby solder joint that is pretty obvious. On this earring, I used an appropriate amount of solder, and so that's my solder joint right there. Much less obvious, much less blobby. So the moral of the story here is, since your solder is not going to give you a perfect color match, make sure you don't use too much of it. The less of it you use, I mean, obviously you need to use enough to... What is going on with my lipstick? Goodness gracious. My lips are very crooked. You would think I would have noticed that sometime in the past, 10 minutes. But no, just now.
We're not judging.
Because,
You're great.
Thanks, Carol. But anyway, so obviously you need enough to actually solder the joint closed, but don't go overboard. It's a really common newbie mistake, and honestly, it's a pretty common still intermediate advanced mistake to use more solder than you really need, especially for those of us who have this like inbred paranoia about like running out of something. Like, well, what if I don't use enough solder? What if I don't use enough and the joint doesn't solder closed? What's gonna happen then? The answer is, you can always add more solder, but if you use too much, it's a real pain in the ass to get it off. So that's your supplies. Let's talk tools real quick. You're gonna need all your soldering stuff. So that's gonna be a torch, soldering surface. I do have my new soldering board, which is really white, which is why in a minute when I turn my hand cam back on, it's probably gonna look like high noon in the desert. You're gonna need you're gonna need a flat file, and I still haven't cleaned this one. This is the one I used to file the nutmeg. And then you're gonna need 2 skinny cylindrical objects. So I'm gonna use 2 smaller needle files because they've got round handles. You could use metal skewers, you could use knitting needles, crochet hooks. You just need something that's got a cylindrical profile that is in the neighborhood of about 3 to 4 millimeters in diameter. I'm gonna need my hand tools. That's just my regular round nose pliers, chain nose pliers, wire cutters. I'm gonna need flux. We'll talk real quickly about what that is and what it does when it's time for us to use it. I'm not gonna use a pickle pot tonight. I'm going to eschew the pickle pot, and I'm just gonna kind of go slapdash with some steel wool.
Goodness.
I know, instead of pickling. And so that's gonna be, we'll see how that works out for me. And I'm gonna not use super pickle either, and so we're gonna see how that works out for me. We're gonna talk about like what all those things are and what they do when we get around to using them. And I'm sure I've forgotten at least 10 or 15 things. I'll let you know what they are when I remember that I forgot them. So as far as cutting your wire goes, again, this is 18 gauge wire. However long I want my earring piece to be, I want to double that length, and then I want to add about 1/2 inch or so to make up for the bending and the twisting. So these are 2-inch long earring components. I'm going to go with that length. So I'm going to double that, which makes 4 inches, and then add 1/2 inch. So I want 2 pieces of 18 gauge wire at 4.5 inches each. You can do this technique with really a variety of gauges of wire. 18 I find is a nice gauge for an earring because it's sturdy, but it's not too large. But if you want something that is really, sturdy and large and in charge, you could use 16 gauge, you could use 14 gauge. But just bear in mind, of course, that the thicker the wire is, now my cutters are on the floor, the thicker the wire is, the harder it's going to be to twist. So especially if you have issues with hamstring, 18 gauge is a really good kind of sweet spot to stick in. Speaking of shaker and spoon, we got our new shaker and spoon box today, even though we still haven't busted into our last shaker and spoon box due to reasons. Life, winter, and stuff.
In the pursuit of sleepiness?
It's something like that. So, so we will be doing an unboxing of our new shaker and spoon box. I guess we could do it tomorrow night.
We could.
We could do it tomorrow night after Freeform, or we could do it next week. Does anybody have any preferences as to whether we unbox our new shaker and spoon box tomorrow evening, or next week would probably be Thursday night? I'm not going to do it tonight. I had not planned to stay that late tonight, and I haven't promoted it. So your choices are tomorrow or next Thursday. If anybody has a vote, please vote in the chat. Meanwhile, I'm going to take my pieces of wire that I just cut, and I'm going to bend them around so that the ends are coming straight in towards each other. Okay, so it's kind of a roughly ovoid shape at this point, and we want our ends to be pointing straight at each other. And you'll notice when I do this, and I'm going to do a little tension fit so that my ends will sit nicely against each other, that they don't really line up. This is because of the burrs left by the wire cutters. So what I need to do is I need to take my file and I need to flatten out these ends. So I'm going to take my file and I'm just going to set it against the edge of my wire, and I'm just going to push forward with my file. To flatten that out. So see, now that end is nice and flat. I'm going to do the same thing with the other one. And then when I tension fit this again, ideally what I should have is a much more flush joint. Like so. Okay, so see how that's much less noticeable? That's what you want. I'm going to repeat that process with my other wire. So again, bend it around so that the two ends are going straight towards each other. Tension fit it, and by tension fit I mean just bend your ends past each other until they can snap back and they will hold against each other with tension, hence the name, without you having to hold them. Now I'm just going to twist this open and use my flat file to flatten out my ends. Goodness. There's gravitational incidents happening in your area, but you're not even there in your area, so I don't quite know what's happening. I think it was in your area.
Yes.
So Beverly is asking, would a flush cut work? And you're still gonna have to file, because the way that a wire cutter, even a flush cutter, works is it pinches the wire, pinches it, pinches it, and pinches it until essentially it gets so thin that it snaps. So even with a flush cutter, even with the best flush cutter, there's always going to be just a tiny little burr in the center of that piece of wire that's going to keep your edges from meeting. So the answer is, the nicer and better your flush cutter is, the less filing you're going to have to do, but you're always going to have to do some. Now, if you don't want to do any filing, if just filing is against your, moral code, the way to get around that is you would have to actually saw the ends of your wire, because then you will get a true flush cut with no burrs. Alright, but now I've got two little weird kind of bean shapes that I've filed. So now I'm going to grab my soldering board, and it's been a minute since I did my 5-point soldering safety lecture. And I know I still haven't recorded it, so I can just link it to the chat, but I'm going to go ahead and do it now. So, alright, so of course bear in mind that I am not any kind of credentialed anything as far as safety goes. I'm just some rando on the internet. If you are going to solder in your own home, you should definitely do your own research, possibly consult actual professionals, and do everything you can to create the safest workspace possible. But in my years of teaching soldering and fabrication, these are 5 simple points that I find come up again and again as far as creating a safe workspace in your own home and maintaining a safe work environment when you're in a community workspace. So first of all, wow, it's been so long since I did this that I actually forgot the first point. they're in a specific order in my head, and the first one's just kind of hiccuping. Right, got it. So, first of all, try and keep, as best you can, 6 to 8 inches of clear space around your soldering area at all times. That means 6 to 8 inches of space in which there is nothing that is flammable and nothing that is meltable. And the interesting thing about a lot of meltable things is once they've melted, they become flammable. So 6 to 8 inches of clear space, as long as you keep that, your chances of accidentally starting a fire in or around your work area are fairly slim. Number 2, once you've had a flame going in your work area, from that point forward, always assume that everything in your work area is hot enough to burn you, because a lot of it is, even if it doesn't look like it. Tweezers are your friends when it comes to picking up things that might potentially be hot. Number 3, sorry, as I'm talking about 6 to 8 inches, I'm seeing the microphone cord that's like touching my soldering board and going, maybe that's not a good idea. Number 3, ventilation is important. If you find yourself coughing, hacking, wheezing, or, okay, really, camera? No, focus on me, please. Coughing, hacking, wheezing, or being otherwise uncomfortable in the lung area after you've been soldering, you may need to re-examine your ventilation situation. You may need to go outside, you may need to go by a window. This is your body telling you that something that you're inhaling is not agreeing with it, and so, you need to make some change to make your body more comfortable. Don't ignore those things, because when you ignore them for too long, then they turn into serious problems. Goodness gracious! So much gravity is happening in Heather's area, and once again, she's not even there. She's over that way.
I was just gazing upon...
But gravity keeps happening over there.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And let's see, number 4 is something. What's number 4, Heather? Oh, if you're not actively, it's really been
your thing.
Right. It's really been a minute since I did this particular portion of the tutorial. If you're not actively soldering with your torch, turn it off. There's really no reason to leave these guys burning and walk away from them. They're very easy to ignite. They're very easy to extinguish. And not having a burning torch unattended is always a better situation than the opposite. And number 5, know where your fire extinguisher is. If you're working in your own home workspace, you should have a fire extinguisher, preferably within arm's reach if you're in a community workspace. It's okay, Lori. I'm gonna make, I swear to God, I'm gonna make a video of the rules, and then I can just link, and then I don't have to remember them anymore. But if you're in a community workspace, make sure you know where the fire extinguisher is, and of course, if you're in a community workspace, make sure you comply with all written and verbal instructions from whomever is running the workspace. I promise they're not trying to harsh on your mellow. They're really just trying to keep everybody safe. So now that we've had our 5-point soldering safety lecture, a little bit truncated, but it was all there. Let's go ahead and solder these babies together. So I'm going to go ahead and take my flux and let's see, I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so you can see like more things than just that. So what is flux? Flux is a chemical that you apply to surfaces that you are going to solder, and what it does is it keeps your metal from oxidizing, and that allows your solder actually to flow. So if your metal oxidizes, meaning if it gets a layer of black soot essentially on it, what that is that's creating a barrier that's going to prevent your solder from flowing. So what we need to do is we need to protect the metal from that oxide layer in order for your soldering to actually happen. Okay, so I've got my joints all lined up in tension fit. I use a paste flux. It's called Handy Flux. I like Handy Flux because it's easy to use and it's inexpensive. 2 of my most favoritist qualities in, anything ever. So I just put a little bit of flux on the joint, and then I'm going to cut myself 2 very small pieces of solder. Okay, this goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning of the stream of don't use too much solder, especially when you don't have a perfect color match. So I'm just going to take a nip off a teeny tiny little piece. Okay, this little bit right here, this is what I'm cutting off, and this is what I'm going to use to solder my pieces together. Okay, so it is really tiny, it's right there. I'm going to do another piece for my other one. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to locate the tweezers, and I'm going to place my solder on my board, and I'm going to place my piece so that my joint is on top of my solder. So This one was a little warped, so I had to flip it over because you do need contact. Okay, solder will not flow across a gap, right? But so there's my joint right there, and then my solder is right underneath it. I'm going to do the same thing with this other one. Once again, it's very important that the joint is setting on the solder. Now I'm going to heat these with my torch, and what's going to happen is I'm going to heat the entire shape. While I'm heating it, my flux is going to start reacting to the heat. When my flux turns clear, I know that I've reached the temperature at which solder can flow. Then I'm going to focus on my joint until that solder flows up and into my joint. That was disappointing. Alright, so I'm just going to heat the whole thing. I'm just going around with my torch. And the reason, okay, and that's something that happens. Okay, so the reason that I heated the whole thing is because metal conducts heat, and so any part of the metal that you're not actively heating is acting as what's called a heat sink, meaning that it is pulling heat away from your joint. It's going to make it more difficult for you to get your solder to flow. The reason my joint popped is because metal, like all substances, expands when it's heated, and so as it expands and moves, sometimes it can jostle off that tension fit. Now notice that I'm fixing this not with my bare hands, but with some pliers, because I just had a torch on this and it is hot. Alright, so I'm going to retrieve that solder from where it jumped to. And we're going to try this again. Okay, so what happened there was it did solder, but it soldered very warped. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to reheat that. I'm going to try and straighten it out a bit. And you got to be careful. There you go. Be careful of melting your wire. You may have seen just a second ago that this part of my wire got kind of cherry red and it slumped a little bit. Alright, be careful of that, because that means you're about to melt your wire, which is not what you want to do. So this 18 gauge doesn't take a ton of heat to do what we need it to do, so just circle around and then heat your joint, make sure your solder is contacting your joint, and there you go. That one went much more smoothly than the first one. So this one is pretty much perfection. This one's exactly what I want this to look like. So I'm going to go ahead and put that aside to cool. This one needs a little bit of TLC, but I should be able to squish that nice and straight with my pliers, and you would never, you'd never be able to tell that it was wonky to begin with. So it's going to take these just a minute to cool to where I can comfortably touch them with my bare hands. So I'm just going to set those aside. In theory, this is all the soldering that I'm doing tonight, so I can put my soldering things away. Okay, so this is the wonky one. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just take my chain nose pliers and I'm just going to squeeze this so that everything gets straight. So it's pretty easy, see, for me to just squeeze out all of those little sort of bumps and wiggles. And I don't know why I put that away, because I actually still need that work surface. Alright, and then I'm going to just buff these with some steel wool. So I'm going to grab some quadruple zero steel wool, and I'm just going to give these a good buff to shine them up and get most of the oxide off of them. Now, typically what one would do after soldering something is one would put it in a pickle pot filled with a substance called pickle. So pickle's a weak acid solution, and what it does is it cleans all of this crud off of your metal, all the oxide and fire scale and everything, so that you can then buff it and make it shiny and pretty. Like I said, I'm being a little lazy tonight. I didn't bring out the pickle pot, so my steel wool's not taking out all of the oxide, but I'm gonna decide to be okay with that. So typically you would pickle, and then you would put this in either a tumbler, or you would buff it with steel wool to make it shiny. Now, The other thing I talked about just a minute ago was super pickle. So when you are soldering with any kind of a copper alloy that can use bronze and brass, what happens when you solder and then pickle is what the pickle removes all the oxidized copper. Sorry, reverse. The pickle removes all of the oxidized stuff that's not copper. So in the case of bronze, it's going to be zinc. In the case of brass, it's going to be tin, and leaves you with a layer of what is essentially copper depletion gilding on the surface. So what you'll find is that your metal that started out yellow is all of a sudden pink. It's copper colored. And so if that happens to you, what you do is you take a solution called Super Pickle, which is 50/50 hydrogen peroxide and white vinegar is the one that I use. And you put your metal into the Super Pickle and let it soak for a period of time, usually about between 5 and 15 minutes, until the metals return to its native yellow color. But this is my lazy person's finish for tonight. And so you can see there's still some oxide on there, and so I could pickle these if I wanted to at this point. I could also throw them in the tumbler. At some point, a tumbler's going to take off all that oxide, and I'm a huge fan of tumble polishing because it is zero effort on my part. All I have to do is throw them in the machine and let them run for a day or two, and they come out nice and shiny. So I'll probably take my beads off of these after the tutorial and throw them in the tumbler. So now I'm going to take my 2 files, or skewers, crochet hooks, knitting needles, whatever you have, but I'm going to put one on each end of this ovoid shape, and I'm going to pull, okay, and see how that's going to kind of narrow out my shape. And as I pull, I'm going to twist back and forth. And this is a lot easier if I do it closer into my chest because I can use my big chest muscles. So what you're looking at now is this, okay? So you want this kind of really skinny hairpin shape. I'm going to repeat with my other piece of wire. Oh! That was not soldered.
Oh.
So, this is why you should never put your soldering stuff away. Oh yeah, because because hubris, that's why. Okay, so this was obviously, or did it break it broke in a different place. How weird is that?
That is weird.
Okay, well that's okay. I'll solder that new place together. Right, Jan? Oops is one way of, that's one word for it.
Well, you didn't say the worst word.
I didn't. I mean, it's still well before 9, so.
Now that you look up here, it's at least 10 days.
Okay, so I'm going to cut myself another piece of solder, and I'm going to re-solder this place right here where it snapped, which honestly I don't think that's the joint. I think the wire snapped in a different place, which once again is a little odd, but these things happen. Put a little bit more flux on there, and then I'm actually going to pick transfer that piece of solder into place. Still not as bad as hot camera. Jan is not wrong. That was exciting. Wow, you are just being a pain in the gazwanska, aren't you? So it popped, and it flung my piece of solder, I don't even know where. It did. Okay, one more time, shall we? There we go. Okay. So now I'm going to let this cool for a minute. While I'm letting that cool, what I can do is I can go ahead and twist my first one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my files back in there, one on each end, and then I'm just going to start twisting them in opposition until I've twisted up this entire bar. Ideally, you want to have a little bit of tension pulling outward while you're twisting. That keeps your loops and your twists nice and even. That being said, my twists aren't usually perfectly even, and as long as you don't point it out to people, no one's gonna notice. Alright, so try and end with your loops, you know, parallel instead of off from each other. There we go. So that is one twisted piece. Now this is cool enough that I can touch it. So now I'm going to do the same thing, hopefully with this not snapping on me. So I'm just going to pull and twist. And this twist is just the back and forth twist to straighten it out. And then I can just keep my files in there. And remember, keep a little bit of tension outward as you're twisting. That's going to help everything remain even and nice looking. Thanks, Bev. Yeah, when I discovered this technique, I just wanted to twist closed circles all the time. That's all I wanted to do. And since this is a pair of earrings, we do want to sort of match the density of the twist, which means I need to go a couple more times around. And I will be dadgummed if that thing didn't snap again. I have no idea what the deal is with this, but we can solder it together just as well now as we did before, or hopefully better, since... And you know, sometimes it's just a bad soldering day. It really is. Like, it's really okay to put something down and like walk away from it and say, hey, you know what, this just isn't working for me today. I'm gonna try this again tomorrow. Of course, when you're teaching a tutorial on the internet, you have less of an option for that. It is a weak section of the wire, Jan. I just don't quite know why. But anyway. The cool thing about knowing how to solder is you can put things back together when they break. Just like that. Once again, I need to leave this to cool, and I'm going to have to steel wool that. So I'm going to set that aside for a minute to let it cool. Meanwhile, I'm going to go ahead and attach one of my beads. Right? I'm always a fan of putting down and walking away from dishes, because dishes suck. Though I had this discussion with the stream during the snow days, is I would still rather wash dishes than fold and put away clothes. Folding and putting away clothes is my least favorite household chore. Absolute least favorite. I will do anything I can to avoid it, and then while I am doing it, I am so easily distracted that, like, you know, sometimes I'll fold 2 shirts and then, you know, wander away from it because, oh, there's this other thing and this other thing and this other thing, and I come back, you know, 6 hours later and I still only folded 2 shirts. Like, it's just, I don't know what it is, but it's my least favorite. Ha! Beverly's 2. I'm not the only one. Yes. Okay. Heather's 2. Yay! There's 3 of us out there. Alright, so this is a head pin, and I'm going to throw my head pin through the hole of my bead. And by throw, I actually mean thread. And these are really pretty labradorite beads, and I'm just going to go ahead and thread both of them. And then I'm going to do a basic wire wrap loop, and this is how I'm going to attach these to my twisted components. So the basic wire wrap loop, as most of you who are regulars on the Beading Dreams stream know, is one of my very favorite techniques. I really do think it is pretty much the most useful thing you can possibly teach yourself. It's one of the, right, Jan? I know, the whole walking out on the job, it tends to be frowned upon. It's true. But yeah, so the basic wire wrap loop, one of the most useful things you can possibly teach yourself. There's so many things you can do with it. It's such a useful piece of knowledge. And we haven't done a basic wire wrapping tutorial in a minute, so I need to add a couple of things. Yeah, I need to put a basic wire wrapping tutorial up in the next few weeks. I do need to do a Chain of Tears tutorial in the next couple of weeks. Yeah, we need to do a little bit of back to basics here on the Beading Dreams stream. But for now, you're at least going to get 2 walkthroughs of the basic wire wrap loop. And if you want an in-depth tutorial on this, you can go back on our Facebook or our Twitch feeds. There might not be any left on Twitch because they do tend to... there's a Sophia! Hi, Sophia! I didn't see the Sophia. But there's definitely basic wire wrapping tutorials still up on Facebook. Just look for anything that says back to basics, wire wrapped, whatever. And I'll give you more of a deep dive into the wire wrapping, whereas what I'm going to do right now is just enough to finish this project, which is going to be 2. So I'm going to start with my round nose pliers. The round nose are called that because their little nosies are round and pointy. And these are what we use to make round loops. So round pliers make round loops. It seems elementary, but I swear when somebody first told me that, you know, what, 20 odd years ago, it was like a revelation. I was like, oh, that's how you make them round. Seriously, like, little 20-something me was just completely all agog about the existence of round nose pliers. So I'm going to place my round nose pliers so that they're touching that bead, and I'm going to attempt to shed a little bit more light onto this scene here. There. That's much better. Much less like the middle of the night. So place your pliers so that they're touching the top of that bead. Then I'm going to take my non-plier hand, for me that's my left hand. I'm going to push that wire away from me over my pliers to make a 90-degree angle. Now I'm going to loosen my pliers, rotate them an 1/8 of a turn, and grab again. So what I've done is I've grabbed right on that corner that I just made. Then I'm going to pull that wire back up over the top towards me and down. So now what I'm doing is I'm making a loop that's forming around my round nose pliers, because round nose pliers make round loops. Then I'm going to loosen my pliers again, rotate them 1/2 a turn, and put my wire underneath my pliers and away from me to make the ever so famous lady with a scarf. So that's what we call this shape here at the Beading Dreams. It's basically, what it is it's just a completed loop with the tail that hasn't been wrapped yet, but if you're going to be fanciful about it, it looks like a woman in a convertible motoring along with a long scarf trailing out behind her. I'm going to take my lady with a scarf, and I'm going to grab one of my twisted components, and I'm just going to thread that long wire onto that twisted loop and pop that in so that my 2 loops are completely interlocked. Then I'm going to take my chain nose pliers, and I want to hold across that lady's head. Now, what is happening here is I'm also holding that twisted wire loop, and that's fine if you wind up doing that, but the goal here is to hold both halves of the lady with a scarf. So if you get the component in there, no big deal, but you just need to make sure that you're holding both sides of that loop you just made. And then take your long wire, which is your scarf wire, and just start coiling it around. I am pulling pretty hard outwards on my wire to get nice tight wraps, and you're just going to wrap until you get down to your bead, which for me was about 2.5 wraps. And then I'm going to trim that off. And then if you have a pokey stabby end like that right there, I'm just going to press that down with your chain nose pliers. Don't try and press it down with your round nose, because invariably they're going to slip in between your wraps and they're going to make you have a nice, you know, large gap, which is not desirable. Now my other twisted bit should be cool, And I'm going to take a minute and steel wool it. So you do get a different look steel wooling it after after you've twisted it. You can see there's oxide in here that I'm not going to be able to get off with the that's her wrap. Sophia's punning on the stream.
She's not fired.
She's not fired. So what I really need to do with this one now is I need to put it in the tumbler. Or I could go after it with a Dremel tool or a flex shaft as well, but on the bright side, at least, it's all together. So, basic wire wrap loop number 2, round nose pliers, grab so that they are touching the top of your bead, and we're going to go away. Rotate, back up over the top, rotate underneath. That gives me number 2 lady with the scarf. Grab your component, thread that in. Oh, well, don't do that. Goodness gracious. I'm going to use this one instead. Thread that in there so that your loops are completely interlocked like that, not like what I did a second ago. Hold across your lady with the scarf with your chain nose, and again, if you wind up holding this component as well, that's totally fine. Wrap around till you reach your bead. Trim. And press your pokey stabby end down with your chain nose. And sometimes it's helpful to actually hold this loop while you're doing that because it prevents your head pin from just spinning around. Alright, so there's that component. And then the last thing I'm going to do is put my ear wires on. Super duper easy. Just take your ear wire, grab the loop next to where it opens, twist it open, drop your component on there, and make sure you twist it back all the way closed. Alright, you don't want to be able to see any airspace in between there. And then open, drop your component on, close it back, and there we go. That's our twisted bar earrings. These are so much fun and such a really cool, just kind of simple design that just looks really, really awesome and elegant. So thank you all so much for hanging out with us on the Beading Dreams stream. For our twisted bar earrings tutorial, I'm Allison from Beading Dreams in Dallas, Texas. We are an actual brick and mortar. Yes, you should, Lori, and they're so stinking easy. We're an actual brick and mortar retail bead store. That means we are here on Lover's Lane in Dallas Monday through Saturday, 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. to feed your need to bead. If you're not local in Dallas, you can find us on this channel. This channel, twitch.tv/Beading Dream, 5 times a week with complimentary tutorials. We do stream Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday at 6 p.m. plus live merchandise sales every Wednesday and Saturday, typically at 7:30. Now, we do have a little bit of a schedule switch up this week because of our snow days. Tomorrow night is Freeform Friday. Alright, it's not Zoom. We'll go back to Zoom next week, but tomorrow is Freeform Friday. That means I'm going to pick a random project and I'm going to attempt to do it from start to finish on the stream. It's not a tutorial so much as a demonstration, but of course I will mostly explain what I'm doing while I'm doing it. That's going to be tomorrow night from 6 to 7. And then Saturday we have brand new merchandise. We're doing a 3-hour long live merchandise sale from 6 to 9 on Saturday night. So there's no tutorial on Saturday. We're just going to start at 6 and we're going to go until Heather can't write anymore. So that's what's coming up in the next couple of days here on the Beading Dream stream. So we will be back on this channel, twitch.tv/Beading Dream tomorrow, Friday at 6 p.m. Central Time with Freeform Friday, and then Saturday for our live merchandise sale. So everyone have a great night, and we will see you all tomorrow. Bye!